Coming up today, with concern growing by the day, 5 more people in Korea test positive for the MERS virus, bringing the number of confirmed cases to 30. Hundreds more remain under quarantine. Tensions are brewing between the National Assembly and the presidential office over a recently passed bill that empowers lawmakers to demand amendments to government ordinances. Plus, after more than 15 years of controversy and criticism, Sepp Blatter announces that he will resign as president of FIFA as the probe into corruption at football's world governing body grows. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Wednesday, the 3rd of June. You're tuned into our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thanks as always for joining us. I'm Mark Broome. We begin our newscast with the latest developments on the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome or MERS outbreak here in Korea. Today, 5 new MERS cases have been confirmed, bringing the total to 30. Among the new cases, one tertiary infection was confirmed in a patient who shared a hospital room with a patient previously diagnosed with the virus. For more, we connect with our Connie Kim at the News Centre. Connie.
Well, Mark, no MERS deaths were reported overnight, but public fear and anxiety about the virus is growing with an additional tertiary infection confirmed. Korea's health ministry said 4 of the 5 people newly diagnosed with the viral disease stayed in the same hospital ward as the first patient. Now, one tertiary infection was confirmed in a 60-year-old patient who shared the same hospital room with a patient who was diagnosed earlier. Now, this is the 3rd tertiary infection among the confirmed 30 cases and reportedly the first in the world. Korea's health ministry had previously said no tertiary transmissions of MERS had been reported worldwide, which is why only people who came in contact with the first patient were isolated. But after the cases of tertiary transmission were confirmed, the government began isolating people who had contact with anyone infected with the virus. Now, 3 patients are reported to be in critical condition. 3 other confirmed MERS patients are set to be released from the hospital. And 398 are suspected to have contracted the disease. Now, currently 1,312 people who had contact with MERS patients are isolated in their homes or in quarantine facilities to prevent the disease from spreading. And this number, Mark, is expected to grow.
Well, let's hope that those people listen to the authorities and stay home or stay in their hospital rooms. And Connie, how are the health officials viewing today's confirmation of another tertiary infection?
Well, Mark, health officials say there will not be indiscriminate tertiary transmission of the virus because all tertiary infections have come from the hospitals where patients infected with the virus are being treated. Now, take a listen to what one expert had to say.
Hospitals that are treating MERS patients prevent other people from entering those wards. Places other than these hospitals are virus-free.
Mark Kim said, however, people should refrain from visiting someone who was diagnosed with MERS even if they are in recovery. President Park will preside over an emergency meeting this afternoon where containment measures will be discussed. And another issue they're likely to discuss is what happens if more MERS cases are confirmed, because there's currently a lack of facilities where people newly infected with the virus can be treated. At the 17 designated hospitals allowed to treat MERS patients, there are special containment wards capable of blocking the virus spread, but these wards have a total of just 105 beds. And meanwhile, as a preventive measure, Korea is planning to temporarily close more than 200 schools. Officials say it's highly unlikely that young people will contract the virus if they avoid going near the hospital and wash their hands frequently. Also, everyone currently under quarantine is banned from traveling abroad until they're cleared of the infection. And with health experts under fire for a lax and tardy initial response to the outbreak, this week will be critical because a 14-day incubation period after the first person contracted the virus is now up. So we'll have to continue to monitor the disease's progress here in Korea. There is currently no vaccine or treatment for the disease. Back to you.
Well, as a follow-up to that report, lawmakers will question government officials next Monday about the government's response to the MERS outbreak. The deputy floor leaders of Korea's rival parties say Health Minister Moon Hyung-pyo will attend the session at the National Assembly to answer lawmakers' questions about the current situation, future prospects and the government's response to the crisis. Meanwhile, both parties have also agreed to hold the June extraordinary Assembly session for 30 days, also starting next Monday. Korea's ruling party has refuted the presidential office's accusation that a recently passed bill is unconstitutional, adding that it will not paralyze state affairs either, as the top office has also claimed. Holding a Supreme Council meeting on Wednesday, Saenuri Party members stressed the revised parliamentary bill does not encroach upon the president's executive rights. The bill, passed last Friday, requires the presidential office to reconsider their ordinances upon a demand from the National Assembly. Now, some party members are calling for a meeting with the presidential office to try and iron out their differing views, as President Park Geun-hye has indicated that she might use her power of veto. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy is urging the president to refrain from using her veto, saying the government should instead focus all its energy on dealing with the MERS crisis. As a follow-up to that, the presidential office says insulting the president is the same as insulting the people. This came from an official at the top office on Wednesday in response to comments by the main opposition party floor leader that President Park was making a fuss over revisions to the National Assembly law. The law would give the parliament the power to request changes, as we heard, to presidential orders. Now, analysts view this as a message of warning from the president, who earlier this week said she would not accept the revisions as they could paralyze the administration's ability to manage state affairs. Meanwhile, President Park's spokesperson confirmed that the presidential chief of staff relayed the president's opposition to revising the law on the night of May 28th, when the rival political parties were negotiating the controversial bill. The South Korean government has warned that more than a dozen firms operating at the Inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Complex have been warned for violating its guidelines to counter North Korea's unilateral wage hike. The Unification Ministry said on Wednesday that it issued the warning to 18 businesses that paid the increased March wages to the North Korean workers, and added 31 firms are also under review for similar warnings. The ministry had made clear that companies will be punished if they bow to North Korea's unilateral move. A South Korean official said Seoul plans to propose talks with Pyongyang in the coming days to try and resolve the wage tussle. The United States has once again emphasized that it's up to North Korea to take meaningful actions towards denuclearization. The U.S. State Department says the U.S. and its six-party partners, South Korea, China, Japan and Russia, need to put more pressure on North Korea. Last week, the top nuclear envoys from South Korea, the US and Japan agreed to ratchet up pressure on Pyongyang to abandon its nuclear program. The South Korean and US envoys also met separately with China's envoy in Beijing. The six-party talks aimed at ending the North's nuclear programs have been stalled for a long time. Since late 2008, North Korea is demanding an unconditional resumption of talks, but Washington says Pyongyang must first demonstrate its sincerity to its denuclearization commitments. Sepp Blatter has called time on his FIFA presidency, resisting calls for him to step down since the corruption and bribery scandal blew up last week. Blatter finally threw in the towel on Tuesday. His announcement came shortly after sources told media outlets in the US that investigators are looking to build a case against Blatter himself. Our Son Jung-in reports.
In a stunning turn of events, Sepp Blatter announced his intent to resign at a news conference in Zurich on Tuesday. Speaking just 4 days after being re-elected for a fifth term in football's top job, the under-fire 79-year-old said the reforms he had tried to implement over the years had not been enough.
FIFA needs a profound overhaul. While I have a mandate from the membership of FIFA, I do not feel that I have a mandate from the entire world of football, including the fans, the players, and the clubs.
The announcement comes less than a week after U.S. federal agents arrested 9 FIFA officials and 5 marketing executives over allegations of corruption and accepting $150 million over the past 2 decades in bribes from World Cup host countries. It's not clear what triggered Blatter to suddenly call it a day so soon after winning 4 more years in office. But some sources have told U.S. media that Blatter may be implicated in the ongoing federal corruption probe after all. Blatter, who has been FIFA president since 1998, called for an extraordinary Congress to be held as soon as possible to elect a new president. FIFA officials say it will take at least 6 months to allow time for a proper election to replace him between December and March next year. Until then, Blatter is expected to continue to exercise his functions as FIFA president. 손정인, Arirang News.
Now, the Pentagon is investigating whether live anthrax samples were brought into the U.S. Defense Department building itself after an Army lab mistakenly shipped out a batch of what it believed was inactive samples of the potentially lethal bacteria. A U.S. defense official said on Tuesday that a shipment for the Pentagon's police section came from this same batch. Officials said it was unclear whether the sample was ever brought into the Pentagon or was in areas directly outside of the main building. The shipment was sent from the U.S. Army's Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, the lab where samples are usually deactivated prior to their distribution. Instead, these live samples were sent to labs in 9 U.S. states and Korea by accident. The anthrax was meant to be used to calibrate sensors that detect chemical and biological agents. Rescue teams in China are racing against the clock to find survivors among the more than 400 people missing after a tourist boat capsized in the Yangtze River. Thousands of police, soldiers and medical workers have been working throughout the night and this morning around the upturned hull in China's central Hubei province. More than 36 hours have passed now since the ship sank, but only 14 of the 456 people on board have been rescued, and efforts have thus far proven extremely difficult. 3 people were pulled alive from the hull on Tuesday, but 7 people have been confirmed dead. Among the survivors are the captain and the chief engineer, both of whom have been detained by police for questioning, this according to Chinese state media. Now, most of the passengers were elderly Chinese tourists on an 11-day cruise along the river, which is Asia's longest, and its famous Three Gorges region. Now, we're nearly halfway through the year and a number of remarkable changes have been happening to the global economy. For an in-depth analysis of the hottest issues facing the Korean and world economy, Shin Se-min spoke to a senior World Bank official.
How has China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or the AIIB, affected already existing financial institutions like the World Bank?
Well, as you know, that over the last couple of decades, there are always new multilateral organizations being created. We have been always supported of the creation of new institutions because they try to fill a certain gap, and in this case, an infrastructure gap. And we are helping the Asian Infrastructure Bank in many aspects. We see this much more in the overall context of that we need to do a lot more on infrastructure collectively, whether that is through a bilateral channel, a private sector channel, or a multilateral channel. These channels have proven not to be sufficient. So anything that adds and can help solve a part of the problem should be welcome.
And a lot of economists in Korea have forecasted that the country's economic outlook looks dim, stuck between a slowing China and a recovering Japan. We're halfway through the year now. How do you see Korea's economy, and what should policymakers do to better the situation?
Well, it's clearly that the whole world economy is still struggling with the growth challenge, if you wish. But yes, in China's economy has been softening. Also, world economic growth is still not strong. We see this actually always as an additional reminder to all countries that the structural agenda remains essential to improve competitiveness and see how one can best deal with major structural challenges. There are always structural challenges that are difficult, but that they can help resolve some of the growth problems in the individual countries.
The global oil prices has been on a downward streak for some time now, and from what I understand, the lower oil prices should be linked to higher growth, but we haven't been able to see that in a global economy. What are we missing here?
Well, I think this is one aspect. Clearly, what you are seeing is it has had an effect on the price. You see, there is that inflation has been fallen. Also partly as a result of the oil price. This is not something that is new. We have seen that in also past episodes, and certainly in a world economy that is fraught by some uncertainty, people are a bit more conservative. So that's the reason you don't see this immediate spike and growth boost. Is very clear because it reduces of course, the petroleum import bill. It has had a moderating effect on inflation, and of course, it helps firms to improve its competitive position.
Thank you for your time today, Vice President.
You're welcome.
Well, that's all we have time for today. I'm Mark Broome. We do hope to see you at the same time tomorrow. Until then.